Hello everyone, today we will go through configure and manage virtual networks for Azure Administrator. It has many modules inside this learning path. We will go through this configure virtual networks module. It has approximate 35 minutes of reading time. We can see this. So here we will be learning to configure virtual networks and subnets including IP addressing. Let's start. Azure Virtual Networks are essential component for creating private networks in Azure. They allow different Azure resources to securely communicate with each other, the internet, and on-premises networks. Suppose you work for a company in a healthcare industry. Your company is looking to migrate their on-premises infrastructure to Azure. They want to ensure secure communication between their resources in Azure and their on-premises network. The company is also concerned about scalability and availability. By using Azure Virtual Networks, they can create private network in Azure and securely connect to their resources. Next unit is plan virtual networks. A major incentive for adopting cloud solutions like Azure is to enable information technology departments to transition servers resources to the cloud. Moving resources to the cloud can save money and simplify administrative operations. Relocating resources removes the need to maintain expensive data centers with uninterruptible power supplies, generators, multiple fail-safes, or clustered database servers. For small and medium-sized companies, which might not have the expertise to maintain their own robust infrastructure, moving to the cloud is particularly appealing. After resources are moved to Azure, they require same networking functionality as on-premises deployment. In specific scenarios, the resources require some level of network isolation. Azure Network Services offer a range of components with functionalities and capabilities as shown in the following image. Virtual network, load balancer, application gateway, traffic manager profile, virtual network gateway, virtual WAN. Things to know about virtual networks. You can implement Azure Virtual Network to create virtual representation of your network in the cloud. Let's examine some characteristics of virtual networks in Azure. An Azure Virtual Network is a logical isolation of Azure cloud resources. You can use virtual networks to provision and manage virtual private networks in Azure, VPN. Each virtual network has its own classes, interdomain routing. This is CIDR block. CIDR block means nothing but IP addresses in a range and can be linked to other virtual networks and on-premises networks. You can link virtual networks with on-premises IT infrastructure to create hybrid and cross-premise on hybrid or cross-premises solutions when CIDR blocks of the concerning network don't overlap. So hybrid or cross-premises solutions, we should make sure CIDR flags should not overlap. That should not be same. You control the DNS server settings for virtual networks and segmentation of virtual network into subnets. The following illustration depicts a virtual network that has a subnet containing two virtual machines. The virtual network has connections to an on-premises infrastructure and separate virtual network. This is on-premise, this is a separate virtual network. Things to consider when using virtual networks. Virtual networks can be used in many ways. As you think about configuration plan for virtual network and subnets, consider the following scenarios. Let's see the scenarios. Create a dedicated private cloud-only virtual network. Cloud-only private. Sometimes you don't require cross on-premises configuration for your solution. When you create a virtual network, your services and virtual machines within your virtual network can communicate directly and securely with each other in the cloud. Okay. You can still configure endpoint connections for the virtual machines and services that require internet communication as part of your solution. Okay. Securely extend your data center with virtual networks. You can build traditional site-to-site VPNs to securely scale your data center's capability. Site-to-site VPNs use IPsec to provide a secure connection between your corporate VPN gateway and Azure. Okay, site-to-site. Enable hybrid cloud scenarios. Virtual networks give you a flexibility to support a range of hybrid cloud scenarios. You can securely connect cloud-based applications to any type of on-premises systems such as mainframes or Unix systems. Okay. Now we'll go on create subnets. Subnets provide a way for you to implement logical divisions within your virtual network. Your network can be segmented into subnets to help improve security, create performance, and make it easier to manage. Things to know about subnets. There are certain conditions for IP addresses in a virtual network when you apply segmentation with subnets. Each subnet contains a range of IP addresses that fall within the virtual network address space. Okay. The address range for a subnet must be unique within the address space for the virtual network. The range for the one subnet cannot overlap with the other subnet IP address ranges in the same virtual network. The IP address space for subnet must be specified by using CIDR notation. You can segment a virtual network into one or more subnets in Azure portal. Characteristics about IP addresses for subnets are listed. Okay. Name IPv4, IPv6, available IPs. Reserved addresses. For each subnet, Azure reserves 5 IP addresses. The first 4 IP addresses and the last addresses are reserved. Let's examine the reserved addresses in an IP range of 192.168.1.0/24. So out of this, it starts from 1.0 to 1.3. First 4 completed, here as shown, and the last one would be 255. So why it is 255 here, we will discuss about this in a separate video. Things to consider when using subnets. Okay. Consider service requirements, network virtual appliances, service endpoints, network security groups, private links. Okay, let's go from bottom to up approach. Let's see. Consider private links. Azure Private Link provides private connectivity from virtual network to Azure platform as a pass. So, Azure Private Link is a private connectivity from virtual network to Azure platform. Okay, as a pass. Customer owned or Microsoft partner services. Private links simplify the network architecture and secures the connection between endpoints in Azure. The service eliminates data exposure to the public internet. Let's go to the next one. Consider network security groups. You can associate 0 or 1 network security group to each subnet. So each subnet will have 0 or 1 network security group. You can associate the same or different network security group to each subnet. Same subnet or different subnet to each subnet. Each network security group contains rules that allow or deny traffic to and from resources and destinations. Okay. Consider service endpoints. You can limit access to Azure resources like Azure Storage Account, Azure SQL Database to specific subnets with a virtual network service endpoint. Okay. You can also deny access to the resources from the internet. You might create multiple subnets and then enable service endpoint for some subnets but not others. You might create multiple subnets and then enable service endpoints for some subnets but not others. Okay. Enable service endpoint for the subnets. Okay. Consider network virtual appliances. Azure routes network traffic between all subnets in a virtual network by default. You can override Azure's default routing to prevent Azure routing between subnets. You can also override the default to route traffic between subnets through a network virtual appliance. If you require traffic between resources in the same virtual network to flow through a network virtual appliance, deploy the separate resources to different subnets. Consider service requirements. Each service directly deployed into virtual network has a specific requirement for routing and the types of traffic that must be allowed into and out of associate subnets. Okay. A service might require or create their own subnet. There must be enough unallocated space to meet service requirements. Suppose you connect a virtual network to on-premises network by using Azure VPN gateway. The virtual network must have dedicated subnets for the gateway. Okay. So the next unit is create virtual networks. Okay, we have total 11 out of 4 we are in now. Right. Create virtual networks. You can create virtual networks at any time. You can also add virtual networks when you create virtual machine. Things to know about creating virtual networks. When you create a virtual network, you need to define IP address space for the network. Okay. Plan to use IP address space that's not already used in the organization. Okay. The address space for the network can be either on premises or in the cloud, but not both. Okay. It's separated. Once you create IP address space, it cannot be changed. If you plan your address space for cloud-only virtual networks, you might later decide to connect an on-premise site. Okay. To create virtual network, you need to define at least one subnet. Each subnet contains a range of IP addresses that fall within the virtual network address space. Okay. The address range for each subnet must be unique within the address space for the virtual network. The range for one subnet cannot overlap with other subnet IP addresses ranges in the same virtual network. Okay. You can create virtual network in Azure portal, provide Azure subscription, resource group, virtual network name, service region for the network. Okay. We have to select like this. Then, so plan IP addressing. You can assign IP address to Azure resources to communicate with Azure Azure resources, your on-premises network and internet. There are two types of Azure IP addresses, private and public IP address. Private means private to the enable communication within Azure virtual network and your on-premises network. You create a private IP address for your resource when you use a VPN gateway or Azure Express route circuit to extend your network to Azure. Public IP address allow your resource to communicate with internet. Okay, you can create a public IP address to connect with Azure public facing services. The following illustration shows virtual machine source that has private IP and public IP address. Private IP for VPN gateway on premise and then public IP to access the internet. Things to know about IP addresses. Let's take a closer look. IP addresses can be statistically assigned and dynamically assigned. You can statically assign or dynamically assign. You can separate dynamically and statically assigned IP resources into different subnets. Okay. Okay. Static IP addresses don't change and are the best for certain situations such as DNS name resolution, where a change in the IP address requires updating host records. Okay. IP addresses based on security model that requires app services to have static IP address, TLS, SSL certificates linked to IP address, firewall rules using IP addresses, role-based virtual machines such as domain controllers and DNS servers. Okay. Next, create public IP addressing. You can create public IP address for your resources in Azure portal. So here SKU type, all options are here. Things to consider when creating public IP addresses. Create public IP addresses. Configure the following settings. Select to create IPv4 or IPv6 addresses or both addresses. The both option creates two public IP addresses, IPv4 address and IPv6 address. Okay. Select SKU for the public IP address including basic and standard. The value must match the SKU of the Azure load balancer with the address is used. Okay. So SKU must be matched with the load balancer. Okay. Enter a name to identify IP addresses. The name must be unique within the resource group you select. Okay. IP address assignment. Identify the type of IP addresses assignment to use. Dynamic. Addresses are assigned after the public IP address is associated to an Azure resource is started for an first time. Dynamic addresses can change if a resource such as virtual machine is stopped, deallocated, then restarted through Azure. The address remains the same. If a virtual machine is rebooted or stopped from within the guest OS, when a public IP address resource is removed from resources, the dynamic address is released. When it is released, if a resource such as virtual machine is stopped or stopped means deallocated, then restarted through Azure. Okay, the address remains same if a virtual machine is rebooted or stopped from within the guest OS. Okay, if it is rebooted or stopped from within the computer, I mean the virtual machine, then it will be same. Okay, when public IP address resource is removed from a resource, yes, when we delete the public IP from the removed, okay, dynamic address will be released. Static address. Addresses are assigned when public IP address is created. Okay, static addresses aren't released until a public IP address resource is deleted. Okay, only if it is deleted. Here if it is removed, if address doesn't associated to a resource, you can change the assignment method after address is created. If address is associated to a resource, you might not be able to change the assignment method. Okay, I don't know what it is mean. If the address is associated to a resource, you might not be able to change the assignment method. I don't know what is that assignment method. I think, okay, this is dynamic and static. Okay, it's a assignment method. If address is associated to a resource, you might not be able to change the assignment method. Okay, I got it now. If we assign this IP to something, we cannot change the assignment method from static to dynamic. I got it. Great. Associate public IP addresses. Next unit. A public IP address resource can be associated with the virtual network interfaces, internet-facing load balancers, VPN gateways, and application gateways. You can associate your resource with both dynamic and static public IP addresses. Okay, public IP addresses may be dynamic or static. Things to consider when associating public IP addresses. Okay, a virtual machine, NIC, dynamic IP, static IP, load balancer, front-end configuration, yes, VPN gateway IP configuration, application gateway, front-end configuration, yes, okay. Public IP address SKUs. When you create a public IP address, you select the basic or standard SKU. Your SKU choice affects the IP assignment method, security, available resources, and redundancy option. The following summarizes difference between SKU types for public IP addresses. Basic SKU, static or dynamic. Standard SKU, static. Security, open by default. Standard SKU would be secure by default, closed to inbound traffic. Okay. Resources, network interfaces, VPN gateways, application gateways, and internet facing load balancers. Here, network interfaces are public standard load balancers. Redundancy, not zone redundant by default. So, standard SKU is zone redundant by default. We have to remember all these things. Next unit, allocate or assign private IP addresses. A private IP address resource can be associated with virtual machine network interface, internal load balancer, and application gateway. Azure can provide an IP address, or you can assign the IP address, static assignment, whatever. Things to consider when associating private IP addresses. Virtual machine will be connected through NIC, so we can have dynamic or static. Internal load balancer will be connected through front-end configuration. Application gateway will be connected through front-end configuration. Private IP address assignment. A private IP address is allocated from address range of virtual network subnet, that is a resource is deployed in. There are two options, dynamic and static. Dynamic, Azure assigns the next available as unassigned unreserved IP addresses in the subnets address range. Dynamic assignment is the default allocation method. Okay, we have to remember this. Suppose addresses 0.4 to 0.9 are already assigned to the resources. In this case, Azure assigns 0.10 to a resource. Yeah. You select and assign unassigned unreserved IP address in the subnet's address range. Suppose a subnet address range is 16, 4 to 9 are already assigned. You can assign any address between 10 to 254. That's fine. So, interactive lab simulation. So, this is a lab scenario. Your organization is migrating network infrastructure and virtual machines to Azure. As the Azure administrator, you need to configure Azure virtual networks and subnets, connect remotely to Azure virtual machine by using RDP, verify virtual machines in the same virtual network can communicate. So these three tasks we need to do. Let's do that. So this is the architecture diagram. VMs are in the same subnet, default subnet, and it is inside a vnet, and we have to check that connection. So this is task 1, create virtual network and the second virtual machine. We have to create 2 virtual machines and test the virtual machine connections. I'm performing the lab now.
Welcome to this exam guide to exercise 4 of Microsoft. To navigate this guide, follow the prompt. Microsoft Azure Fundamentals is. In this exercise, you'll create a virtual network. This exercise is made up of 3 tasks. In this first task, you'll, from the Azure portal homepage, click the select Virtual Network. Click Create. Under Resource Group, click Create New. Provide a name for the resource group, and then click OK. On the Create Virtual Network blade, click Next, IP. Click the Delete button to remove the current IPv4 address space. Enter the new address space as shown on your screen. Click Add Sub. Enter the subnet details as shown on your screen. Click Add. Click Review and Create. When you see the notification that validation passed, click Create to deploy the virtual network. This task is now complete. In this next task, you'll create 2 virtual machines in the. After the deployment is complete, click the Menu button and select Virtual Machine. Click Create, and then select Virtual Machine. On the Basics tab, fill in the information as shown on your screen. Leave the defaults for everything else. Click Next. Leave the defaults. Make sure the virtual machine is placed on the vnet1 virtual network. Review the default settings, but do not make any other changes. After the validation passes, click Create. Now you'll repeat the process to create a second virtual machine in the same virtual network. We've just skipped ahead in time to when the second virtual network has been deployed. As you can see, it has a unique name. In this task, click to open V. On the Overview blade, you can see that its status. Keep the default op. Open the downloaded RDP. When prompted, click Enter your user credentials. You may receive a certificate warning during the sign-in process. You are now in your virtual machine. At this point, you'll follow the same process to connect to the second. Click Turn Windows Defense. Next, modify the firewall settings for. Click OK. Behind the scenes, we have also disabled the firewall on VM2 the same way. Try to ping VM2, which should be run. You have successfully pinged VM2 from VM1. This exercise is now complete. Click anywhere to continue. You can now click below to continue to the next exercise, or close this guide and return to the menu.
So that is how we have tested everything through interactive lab simulation. Let's do the knowledge check. Our company is migrating, and sales department has separate range 10.3.0.0 to 16. Infra team has firewalls to deny traffic based on IP. How network enable communication between resources. Okay, choose the best response. Sales department subnet range, which IP address can be dynamically assigned. Yes, see, first 4 addresses will be reserved, right? So this one be used. This one be used because it is a last address. This will be used. What feature can support the denial of traffic based on IP address range? Statistically assigned IP address, because we have seen this in the documentation. Which of the following statements about virtual network is correct? Broadband communication is enabled by default. Azure Virtual Network enables communication between Azure resources. Yes, exactly. This is not, this is false. Okay, let's see the answers. Great. All answers are correct. Let's see the summary. Main key takeaways are this. Azure Virtual Network allows different Azure resources to securely communicate with each other. The internet and on-premises networks, subnets within networks provide logical divisions, improving security performance and management. When creating virtual networks, ensure that IP address space is unique and does not overlap with other subnets. IP addresses can provide public or private access to resource. Okay, great. Module completed. Thank you for watching this video. Let's connect in another module discussion.